I kept my mouth shut when my mother told me I couldn't afford my father's birthday dinner. Partly because she said it in the church parking lot while the choir director walked by, and partly because Dad was standing there pretending to be interested in the landscaping, as if bushes could save a person from a conversation. I could feel the heat coming up through the blacktop and the back of my neck prickling under my hair, and I decided to breathe through it because I had exactly 25 days to get to the first Friday in June without setting the whole family on fire. I didn't tell her that I knew the hostess at Madison and Maple would put us in the long corner room by the windows, or that the chef had texted me on Thursday about a new shrimp and grits he wanted to run if I gave the okay, or that the line cook with the Braves cap had already ordered a sheet cake from the bakery on Oak Street with a buttercream he swore tasted like somebody's grandmother actually made it. I only said, "I'll be there at 6. And watched my mother tuck her phone into her purse the way she tucks away a win. 6 is too early for a Friday, she said, squinting at the sun like it was personal. People work. Besides, the restaurant you picked is, well, it's trendy. Your father is a meat and potatoes person. He doesn't like small plates. He was a manager for 30 years. He doesn't have patience for tiny food. Madison and Maple does a ribeye that weighs more than the state fair pie judges, I said, and I kept my tone light because Dad was there. Because the church bell had just rung the quarter hour and everyone else was moving toward their cars with the sleepy look people get after coffee and hymns. They have honest portions. He'll like it. You can't possibly cover the check for 12, she said, her voice softer but sharper, a blade under a towel. I saw your car tires. You need new ones. You should bring a card and a nice photo for the frame I'm getting. I already spoke to Aunt Nora and she agrees it's better if your father doesn't have to pretend to like experimental food to make you feel modern. Dad cleared his throat and examined the flag on the pole like he always does when he wants to disappear into a patriotic thought. We can all pitch in, he said, trying to smooth what my mother had made bumpy. I'm not in this for the show. It isn't a show, I said, and I felt my face get warm even though the breeze had picked up and the smell of cut grass came from somewhere behind the fellowship hall. It's a dinner. Uncle Ron is back from Tampa. Nora's boys will eat anything that doesn't move. We'll sit, we'll talk. We'll celebrate the man who replaced the water heater and taught us to drive in a parking lot. It's not a parade. She pressed her lips together like a person who has decided the debate is over because she did the deciding. We'll see, she said, which in our house is Southern for no, and she slid into the passenger seat with the sound a leather purse makes when it drops onto floor mats that need to be vacuumed. My father gave me a wobbly smile and followed her, and the Braves pregame started on the radio before they had even pulled onto Maple Street, the announcer's voice doing that low thing men do when they're about to talk for 3 straight hours. On the first Monday of the month, the local news played a segment about a black bear spotted 2 towns over walking along the golf course like he had a tea time, and my phone buzzed with a group text from my mother to family, Dalton, that read, "Dinner Friday, June 7th, 7 p.m. at the club, casual nice. Please RSVP by Wednesday so I can alert the staff. No surprises with the bill." I stared at the words, the club, and felt my heart kick in my chest, not with fear exactly, more like my body tapping me on the shoulder to say pay attention. I typed and erased and typed again, then finally wrote, "We already booked Madison and Maple. Dad likes it. I've got it. 7 is fine. See you there." 3 bubbles appeared and went away, and then my Aunt Nora texted a shrug emoji followed by, "Just tell me where to park," which is the most helpful thing she has done in 13 years. That afternoon, I took the 20-minute drive across town with the windows cracked just enough to smell the hot tar smell from the road work on County 9 and stopped at the restaurant to see if Chef had everything for the menu we'd discussed. The dining room was quiet the way it is on Mondays, with chairs stacked on tables and that clean lemon smell the front of house manager likes, because she says people don't notice it until they notice the lack of it. "We're good on the ribeye and the catfish," Chef said from the pass, his hair under a Braves cap bent at the brim, like he's been on the same team forever. "I've got a line on some stone-ground grits if the supplier doesn't make me drive 20 miles to chase him." "You nervous?" "Not about the food," I said, and I didn't say anything else because I knew better than to put feelings into sentences too early in the week. He slid a tasting plate across the counter like a person offering a truce to the day, and I tasted and nodded and altered a sauce by a half-inch left on the salt, and he made a note in his pocket notebook like a coach writing a lineup he has thoughts about. On the second Tuesday, after I finished a long day at the office where I answer phones at the community center and try not to correct people when they call and ask about yoga for older people, I drove to my parents' house because pretending we were not having a tug-of-war was not going to make the rope go slack. The television was on to a baseball recap that would loop 3 times before anyone changed the channel, and the living room smelled like lemon cleaner and roasted almonds because my mother eats them from little cups and calls it dinner when my father microwaves leftovers. "We should talk about Friday," I said, setting a pie tin on the counter because I had learned that a tin changes the weather of a kitchen better than an argument. I reserved Madison and Maple for 12 at 7, which is later than I like to eat, but I'm flexible. The table is in the corner room. We'll have a family-style salad and the rest a la carte. My mother wiped at a non-existent smear on the refrigerator door with a paper towel that had no water on it and said she worried about the parking there because Aunt Nora hates parallel. "The club is easier," she said. "We know the staff. They know us. The portions are generous and you don't get charged for every extra thing, like bread, which strikes me as a basic. You can't keep up appearances and then ask people to pass a basket of bread like it's an add-on. It looks cheap." "I'm not keeping up appearances," I said, keeping my voice low because Dad had that look like he was waiting for the commercial break to end. "I'm planning dinner. You can bring your club bread to the table in your purse if you want." She ignored the joke because she ignores jokes when she wants to win. I checked the menu online. The steak is $48. That's before sides. It's not kind to invite people and then ask them to watch the math. You know your father hates that. People will try to read the room and nobody wins, and suddenly you've turned a birthday into a budget committee. Dad hates when you want him to pretend that being alive isn't worth $48, I said, not unkindly, just straight, and my father made a pretense of turning up the volume on a highlight so he wouldn't have to choose a side. "And since you know the staff at the club so well, you can invite them to your next committee meeting. Friday is mine." She put the paper towel in the trash with more force than paper deserved. "You don't have the money for 12, she said. "You barely have the money for 4 if we order like adults. I know what you make. You sit at a desk at a nonprofit. They pay you in tote bags." "Mom," I said, and my hands went cold the way they do when my body would like to run. "You know that isn't true. You also know that last month I took on something extra. We've talked about learning to let your kids surprise you. Maybe today's the day." "What extra?" she said, folding her arms, forgetting the part about letting the other person surprise you. "No vagueness. People who are vague are hiding something they already know you won't like." "I've been helping out at Madison and Maple," I said. "And before you say the word hobby with that voice, I mean after hours, business side, menus and margins, and the owner has been teaching me what the dollars look like. It's not charity. It's a job. A thing I'm good at." It came with a little bump, plus the bonus when certain numbers lined up. She gave a low, humorless laugh that wasn't aimed at anything except the part of me that likes to try. "Then the owner can pick up the check, since he likes you so much. No one needs to watch you give your father a bill for his own birthday." I put the pie tin on the counter and took a breath that went all the way down. "The check is covered. You can bring cash if you want to feel better on the ride over. I'm asking you to trust me about one dinner. 12 seats. 2 hours. A cake with his name on it that does not say the club. That's all. By the second Saturday, the garage sales started on our side of town the way they always do when the weather remembers how to be summer, and Aunt Nora called me from someone's driveway to ask if she should buy a set of mismatched salad plates because they were practically giving them away, and I told her no because she doesn't cook for 12 in a single lifetime. My cousin Micah texted that the family group chat had turned into a vote about the restaurant versus the club, and he said if I wanted to win, I should offer free valet. I asked him to stop making it into a game, and he sent a string of baseball emojis and a shrug, and then a photo of a cooler he was haggling over. At the farmer's market, I ran into Mrs. Klein from church, who told me, with her voice pitched low, that she had heard from someone who would know that I was planning a showy dinner that made my father uncomfortable, and she said she hoped I would think of the family first. I picked up a basket of strawberries and said I was thinking of the family and that my father had eaten small plates with me 3 times in the last 5 years and had never once complained. And I saw in her eyes the look people get when you show them a fact that doesn't fit the story they were trying to enjoy. On the last Thursday before payday, I finished my shift at the community center and pulled into the lot behind Madison and Maple because Chef had asked me to taste the grits with the shrimp as the supplier had finally delivered the good stuff, the kind with texture that actually resists your spoon in a pleasing way. The back door was propped with a crate, which I hate because I worry about raccoons like a person twice my age, and the cooler hummed, and there was that good clean smell of bleach and citrus and roasted peppers from lunch service. "You're early," Chef said, sliding a bowl across the stainless. "Tell me if the heat is a hair too much. I forget not everybody likes to sweat." "I'm fine with a little sweat," I said, and I felt the warmth hit my face and the back of my throat, and I told him he had nailed it and to dial the salt a tick back for the table because Aunt Nora thinks she has blood pressure somebody else could fix. He made a note, and then the front of house manager, Lex, stuck her head through the pass and said my name in the tone she uses when she's trying not to lose her cool. "Your mother is on the phone with my host, insisting the private room is hers and that she'll approve the menu. She's telling people you can't pay and that the restaurant would be smart to move the reservation to a bigger spender who doesn't change things. I've put her on hold 3 times because I don't hang up on customers, but if I hear the words 'for the good of the staff' one more time, I might actually join a monastery." My face went hot in a way that made my eyes water. "Put her through," I said, and then I paused, because the easy, petty part of me wanted to come in with a rehearsed line and a satisfying "I told you so," and the part of me that has learned, slowly, to play a longer game reminded me that Friday night wasn't here yet. "No," I said. "Don't put her through. Tell her we're at capacity and that we honor the first reservation made for that room on that night. If she presses, tell her the person who made that reservation has already wired a deposit and settled the prefix cost, which is true in the way that counts." Lex looked at me like she was trying to guess what I wasn't saying. "Got it," she said. "If she asks who booked it, say the host that night," I said, which is also true. At that exact moment, my phone rang with my mother's ringtone, the one that sounds like a doorbell on a TV show, and I let it go to voicemail, and then she texted a long paragraph that started, "I spoke to the staff, and they are worried about the optics of having to explain to people that you can't pay for dinner you chose," and it ended with, "I have moved the event to the club for everyone's comfort. Please bring a modest gift card and your happy attitude," and I felt my shoulders knot up in a way that made my jaw ache. Chef saw my face and disappeared into the office and came back with a cold bottle of water and a look that would have been called fatherly if it weren't coming from a man who swears at traffic lights. "You knew it would be something," he said. "You also knew we could handle it." Eat this piece of fish so I don't have to throw it away, and then go home and don't answer the phone for 2 hours. Friday morning, the Braves highlight played again during the news, and the weather guy said we might get a shower in the late afternoon to cool things off. And my father texted me a photo of our dog from when we were kids because he thinks distractions work better than apologies. At lunch, I stopped by my parents' house because not showing up would have been the same as admitting I was scared, and my mother opened the door with a look that said she had already written the ending. "We'll meet you at the club at 7, she said, not pausing long enough to let me speak, the smell of lemon cleaner so strong I almost coughed. "Your father will wear the blue shirt. Don't be late. Please don't make a scene." "We're not going to the club," I said, calm because there is a level past angry that feels like a cool room after too much sun. "We are going to Madison and Maple. The room is reserved. The menu is set. The bill is covered. If you walk into the club, you will be eating someone else's dinner at the expense of a different family's plan, and I know you don't do that to people even when you've decided I deserve rough edges." "You're being dramatic," she said, folding her arms. "You want attention. You always have." "I want to celebrate my father without inviting a spreadsheet," I said. "If you want to attend, you will sit at our table and enjoy the food, and you will not try to fix anything while it is happening. If you can't do that, direct your driver accordingly." She almost laughed, and then she saw that I meant it, and her face did something I recognized from childhood when someone told her no. "You're out of your depth," she said. "You don't know what things cost in the real world. You sit behind a desk with a plastic plant and think you're everyone's savior. I'm protecting you from embarrassment." "Maybe let me embarrass myself," I said, and then I walked out because staying would have been the same as asking her permission. When I pulled into my apartment lot, my phone buzzed with a text from Aunt Nora that said, "Your mother is in rare form." She called the country club and told the woman to put up a closed for private event sign on the patio so people would know we were important, and then she texted the church ladies and told them to ignore your messages because plans have changed. "Do you need me to run interference or bring a folding chair and guard the door like a bouncer?" I laughed because Aunt Nora describes herself as a bouncer every chance she gets, and I told her to wear comfortable shoes and be at Madison and Maple at 6:45 with a smile and the salad plates she didn't buy. Then I set my phone face down and took 2 slow sips of water because if I let myself get dry-throated, my voice would go high and tight and nothing good would come of it. Friday afternoon slid by with the slow speed that comes when you want the clock to jump. I showered and put on the navy dress my sister says makes me look like I have a plan, and I drove the 4 miles to Madison and Maple with the air conditioning just high enough to dry my hands. The parking lot was full of the regular dinner crush, not the club's kind of crowd, but ours, families and couples and friends who don't need matching napkins to feel like they belong. The hostess, a college kid named Ellie who wears her hair in a bun the size of a grapefruit on top of her head, looked up and her face brightened and she said my name like relief. "You're here. We're ready. The long room is set, the cake is in the cooler, and chef wants to know if you should send the shrimp to the table 5 minutes after the salads or 10. Also, there's a man in a blue shirt who keeps checking his watch and asking if there's a TV with the game somewhere that he can see from a corner without making a thing of it. He's very sweet. I set him a spot where he can see the score without blocking anyone's sightline. I smiled because that was my father, down to the watching and the pretend not caring. 5 minutes, I said. He gets fidgety if there's too long a pause, and he'll pretend it's the restaurant's fault when really it's the way he taught us to eat fast when he worked nights. Ellie grinned and pointed to the hallway. "Go see Chef before you sit. He's pacing like a cat, which is funny because he hates cats." In the kitchen, the heat rose to my face and stayed there. Chef had plates lined in 2 rows like soldiers about to be fed, and the smell of butter and pepper and seared meat drifted under the vents toward the back door where the evening air was trying to get in through the crack. "Everything's on time," he said without looking up. "We're sending the salad that looks better than the club's, and the ribeye is resting like a prize. I heard from Lex that your mother called twice more to ask if the staff would be professional if she chose to take the family elsewhere at the last minute, as if we're going to throw a tantrum because she doesn't like our chairs." "She likes chairs that make a person feel watched," I said, and then I took the small folded envelope from my purse and slid it across the counter to him. The one with the tip I had set aside in cash because I didn't want my mother hovering over a signature line at the table. "This is for your people. If she does what she does, nobody earns less because of it." He glanced at the envelope and then at me, and his face did that softening thing men's faces do when they recognize that the person in front of them is carrying something heavier than a purse. "Go sit," he said. "Let us do our jobs. If the sky falls, it will be after dessert." At 6:50, my father walked in wearing the blue shirt, just as predicted, and the relief I felt when he saw me and smiled like a boy made the past week's tightness in my chest loosen by a fraction. He hugged me hard, the way men from here do when they're only going to hug once, and he asked if he'd have to dress the salad himself, and I told him he could if his fingers were clean, and he laughed because he knows I hate jokey sanitation rules. Then Aunt Nora arrived with the 2 cousins who think eating is a sport, and they kissed my cheek and said, "We're ready." And my sister slipped in behind them looking like she wanted to be anywhere else, and also like she didn't know how to do that without blowing up whatever bridge she thinks can still be crossed. My mother came at 7:05 with 2 of her friends who always look like they smelled something faintly unpleasant, and she stopped just inside the entry so that everyone near the host stand could see her. The way she has always made an entrance even when the room is full of people who were doing just fine before she arrived. She opened her mouth to say she had moved the dinner, to announce that the club was waiting and that we all needed to respect schedules and budgets and reputations, and that was the exact moment Ellie glanced up, straightened her black blazer, and said my name, and then said something that made the couple behind my mother turn their heads, and the busser near the water station paused mid-pour. "Welcome back," Ellie said with a brightness that was not for show. "The long room is ready, and Chef asked me to tell you the grits are exactly how you like them. He also wanted to thank you for the wine pairing note. The staff signed the card and put it in the office for you to read later." Ellie's eyes flicked briefly to my mother's face and then back to me because she is a kind person and understands theater even when she doesn't know she does. "If there's anything you want adjusted for the table tonight, just tell me and I'll make sure it happens." My mother blinked once, twice, questions moving across her face without landing. Dad looked at me and then at Ellie and then back at me, curiosity lighting up his eyes like a child taking apart a clock to see what's inside. I felt the air in the entry shift the way rooms shift when a secret sits down in a chair you hadn't pulled out yet, and I smiled at Ellie and nodded toward the long room because I didn't need to say anything in that doorway. Not yet. Not with 2 friends of my mother's holding their purses like shields and my cousins making a beeline for the basket of bread as if they knew it signaled something personal. "Let's eat," I said, and my voice sounded steady to my own ears, which felt like a small miracle after the week we had just walked through. "We'll do the talking at the table." I didn't sit at the head of the table because I knew better than to make a shape in a room that would give my mother something easy to point at, so I took the seat to Dad's right, facing the windows where the last of the light found the glass and made a soft glare on the silverware. Aunt Nora settled in across from me and whispered that she would body block any attempt to relocate us, and my cousins grinned like boys who have waited all day to eat and didn't care where as long as it was now. My sister slid into the chair next to Mom with the careful posture of a person keeping her hands in her lap to avoid reaching for a grenade, and Dad asked if the Braves game was on somewhere in the building, and Ellie, who hears everything, pointed to a little corner TV over the bar that carried a scoreboard crawl without sound, and Dad nodded like a man promised coffee has been told it exists. Ellie set down menus no one needed because the food had been ordered yesterday, and then she set a basket of bread that looked suspiciously like a response to the club's supposedly free slices, and Aunt Nora laughed without letting it turn into a cackle. Mom lifted the napkin and said the bread was fine in the tone she uses when the compliment is a critique in a different hat, and I reached for water because if I started with a wine pour, my voice might get ahead of my judgment. "Thank you for coming," I said, aiming my voice down the length of the table the way you throw a ball to a kid you trust to catch it. Not too hard, not lazy. We're going to take it easy on speeches because Dad likes eating better than hearing about eating. We've got salads coming, then shrimp and grits, then a ribeye that would make a county fair judge reconsider his standards, and there's cake with buttercream a man swore would taste like someone's grandmother made it. If you want something different, tell Ellie. She's the boss of the rhythm here. We won't be staying long, my mother said, adjusting her napkin with a precision that could sew a seam. I've told the club we might be a few minutes late. They were gracious. They always are. We're not going to the club, Dad said, quiet, as if he were testing this sentence for weight. I like it here. You like it here because she told you like it here, Mom said, not unkindly, just the way she says things when she needs them to be true more than she needs them to be discussed. This place is showy. There's a difference between dinner and a production. This is dinner, I said. We can call it a production if the lights start falling. The salads arrived in wide bowls that made even Aunt Nora look like she might say something nice about lettuce. Dad started eating like a man who has never believed in letting anything wilt, and my cousins attacked as if the croutons owed them money. Mom picked at the arugula like it had offended her at a grocery store. Ellie moved along the table quietly, her hand on the back of my father's chair when she leaned in to refill his water because she has instincts and uses them. When the shrimp and grits came, the smell lifted the room like someone had opened a door to an easier place, and Dad put his fork down after the first bite and said he should pace himself, then took 3 more bites in a row because he can't. Chef walked out then, wiping his hands on a towel he keeps in his apron, and the line cooks peeked from the past door like kids at a curtain. He reached for Dad's shoulder, squeezed once, nodded to Aunt Nora because she always nods back, and then leaned toward me so my mother could hear and not pretend she hadn't. "Boss, the ribeye's resting," he said. 10 minutes and I'll slice it just how you like it. The wine note was perfect. The pairing sings. Happy first Friday with your name on the paperwork. The room went a degree quieter in the way rooms do when everyone decides to pretend they're not listening while definitely listening. My mother's fork paused midair. Dad turned from Chef to me with his eyebrows lifting the way they do when he learns the ending of a story in the middle. Aunt Nora covered her mouth with her napkin like she was coughing, which she wasn't. My heart climbed into my throat like a bird startled from a fence and then settled because there wasn't anywhere to go but forward. "What paperwork?" Mom asked, her voice neutral if you didn't know the shade chart, which I do. "Please tell me this is not what it sounds like." "I'll tell you at the table," I said to Chef, who nodded, patted my shoulder, and returned to the kitchen like a man who knows where the heat belongs. I looked at my father because it felt right to look at him first. "I should have told you 3 weeks ago. I wanted to, but I also wanted to choose my timing." "You're the owner," Mom said, the word landing with the weight of a word people fight about in court, not kitchens. "Of this restaurant." "With what money?" "Not the whole thing," I said. "An operating stake." Mr. Halter, Madison's majority partner, started the process back in March to retire to Florida and fish. He didn't want the place to get sold to someone who would repaint it and turn it into tapas or a speakeasy with a password. He wanted a person who understood why we carry catfish and not just scallops. I've been working with him after hours on the business side for 3 months. He offered me a chance to buy in on a manageable schedule if I hit some targets. I hit them. We signed the papers on the first Monday. It's not a hobby, it's my second job. It pays enough to cover the tires you think I can't afford. You did this without consulting us, Mom said. You don't buy pieces of restaurants like you buy shoes. Restaurants fail. Everybody knows that. You made yourself look foolish. I made myself responsible, I said. And I didn't consult you because I'm not asking you to pay or to like it. I'm telling you where I'll be on weeknights. And that tonight is on me. The money was wired last week. We're not passing a hat. Dad made a small sound that might have been a laugh if it weren't so careful. He reached for his water, took a sip, set it down, and looked at me with a kind of soft pride I had wanted since I learned to drive in a lot behind the feed store. You did this, he said. You went and did it. I did, I said. I did it because I like being around people who clap for each other over a plate and because I'm good at numbers that are about nourishment, not just lines in a budget meeting at the center. I did it because this room is ours, all of ours, not the club's. He nodded like something had landed that couldn't be knocked loose easily. Mom exhaled through her nose like a teacher who needs the class to lower the noise level. So this dinner is theater, she said. So you could make a point. She turned to Dad. You're letting her use your birthday to show off to her friends who work here. You're letting her buy something she can't carry. I'm letting her feed me, he said, and there was a tone in his voice that made me put my hands flat on the table to keep from reaching for him. Which is what birthdays are for. The ribeye arrived like a centerpiece with purpose, and Chef sliced it at the table because he knows that sometimes show is part of substance. The meat was perfectly pink, and the juices moved like they were supposed to, and my cousins made sounds that would have been rude in a different room. My mother didn't reach for a piece. She reached for her phone. I didn't say anything because telling her not to was the same as inviting a bigger fight. Aunt Nora caught my eye and shook her head once like a person who sees a storm but knows you can't scold weather. When the cake came, white with simple piping and, to David, who never ate small, written across it in blue, my father laughed, the kind of laugh that folds his shoulders and shows his teeth, and the room joined in because cake gives people permission. Ellie cut slices with a steady hand while the barback topped off coffee like it was 1987. My mother put her phone face down next to her plate like a person hiding a red mark and stood, tapping her spoon against the water glass to get attention that was already hers. Before this goes any further, she said, and her voice carried without strain because she practices it, I want to make sure we all understand that this is sweet and well-meaning. But it's not sound. My daughter is not in a position to bankroll philosophical gestures. The club is prepared to welcome us for dessert. The staff there knows us. They will make this right without turning it into a spectacle. Aunt Nora put her cake fork down as if it deserved a landing. Deb, she said, using the tone that remembers sleepovers and double dates and secrets nobody wrote down. Sometimes you choke on words like sound when what you mean is safe. Let the girl give her father a steak. I am his wife, Mom said. I know what he needs. Dad raised his hand half an inch like he was asking to be recognized. I need to eat my cake and drink my coffee and watch the score crawl. I don't need to go anywhere. He looked at me and then at Mom. And I need you to put your phone away. She didn't. The phone buzzed. She flipped it over and read a text that made her shoulders square like a dress jacket. Her mouth thinned. Then she stepped away from the table and moved toward the host's stand with the quick, clipped steps of a woman about to appeal to a manager. I looked at Ellie, who looked at me with something like apology and alarm, and then at Lex, who had materialized near the pass with the quiet that front-of-house managers wear when words could turn to spills. Two uniformed officers walked in the door as my mother reached the host stand. The room stilled because uniforms silence rooms, even when they're just here to check on a noise complaint or a license. Ellie straightened because hospitality people straighten when official eyes arrive. The taller officer took off his hat because he is from here, and he nodded toward Ellie. "Ma'am," he said, polite, "we got a call about a potential disturbance and a bill issue for a large party. Wanted to make sure everything's peaceful." Ellie looked at me, then back to him. "Everything is peaceful," she said. "The bill is not an issue." She glanced at me again. "The host for the long room prepaid the menu and service charge this morning. If there's confusion, we'd love to clear it up." The officer looked past her at our table, at Dad cutting another bite of cake and trying not to embarrass anyone by looking impressed by the police, at my cousins quietly sitting up straighter, at my aunt pulling her cardigan tight because she always does when she sees uniforms. My mother opened her mouth, and I could feel the shape of her next sentence the way you can feel a change in the weather before you see it. I stood because sitting would have meant watching the scene play from the wrong angle. "Officers," I said, and I kept my voice even, "I'm the host. My name is on the reservation and the account. We're honoring my father. If someone called because they don't like where we're sitting, I apologize for the confusion. The restaurant and staff are doing exactly what they're expected to do. No one's skipping out on anything." The taller officer nodded. "We figured," he said. "We've had calls like this before. Folks get excited." He tipped his head toward Ellie. "We'll be on our way unless you need us to stick around." "We don't," Lex said from behind the stand, and her voice had a steel edge under the polish. "Thank you for checking on us. We appreciate it." They left with a murmur and a wave at the busser, who had a cousin in the department and smiled like he didn't want to be the cousin who smiled at cops at work. The door closed. The hum of voices returned, slower at first, then normal. My mother stood very still with her hand on her purse strap. She looked at me like she wanted to say that she had only been trying to prevent embarrassment, which is a word she wraps around choices until they can't breathe. I met her eyes and then looked back at our table. Dad forked cake into his mouth and didn't chew as quickly as he does when he's nervous, which is how I knew he was okay. I sat down. I picked up my fork. I took a bite of cake that tasted like butter and sugar and a morning I remembered when my grandmother let us lick the beaters even though she told us not to every other day of the year. The words came out of me without rushing. "We're staying," I said, not loud, just strong enough to carry. "The club can have us another day if they want to, but tonight is here." My mother returned to the table because doing anything else would have turned the scene into a parade. She sat. She placed her napkin back in her lap. Her face was the careful face she wears at funerals and fundraisers. "Very well," she said, muscles in her jaw working like she was chewing an idea. "If we're going to stay, let's at least do this right. I'd like to make a toast." "Make it about him," Aunt Nora muttered in a pitch only 3 of us could hear. "Not about optics." Mom stood again, lifted her water because she hadn't touched the wine, and rested her hand on the back of Dad's chair. "David," she said, "you have worked hard for decades so that your children could try things. You drove a car that rattled and wore shoes until they embarrassed me, and you never complained. I don't like surprises, and I don't like feeling like I'm the last to know in my own family. But you chose this table, so I will sit at this table. Happy birthday." She clinked her glass against his and sat, and if that wasn't a victory speech, it was the closest thing I was going to get that night. Dad nudged me with his shoulder like a boy daring another across a creek. "You going to tell me everything later," he whispered. "Like when you signed what you signed and how you got a banker to talk to you without yawning." "I'll tell you tomorrow," I said. "After you open the very practical presents." "I like practical," he said. "I like steak more." We ate the rest of the dinner like a group of people on a boat that had rocked and then steadied. Conversation stretched across enough topics to lay a tablecloth over what needed covering without pretending it wasn't under there. My cousins argued about who had the better high school baseball coach. Aunt Nora told Chef, when he came out to check on us, that he should bottle the grits and sell them at the farmer's market to pay for his fishing habit. My sister told me, quietly, that she'd known for a week because Lex had texted her after seeing me sign the last page in the office, and she had stayed out of it because she didn't want to be the messenger who got stuck with the fight. I squeezed her hand under the table and told her I'd take any piece of her that wasn't a complaint. She laughed in a way that showed me the kid she had been before we decided our jobs were to interpret mom to dad and dad to mom, and both to each other. When the coffee came and people started reaching for purses even though no one needed to, Ellie appeared with a small stack of envelopes. She handed one to me, one to Dad, one to Aunt Nora. For the host, she said. For the guest of honor. And for the aunt who threatened to guard the door. Aunt Nora laughed until she saw that the envelope had a gift card inside. A thank you from the staff that made her pretend to blow her nose because crying in restaurants isn't her thing. Dad's envelope had a handwritten note from the dishwashers in the back, nephews of a man he used to work with at the plant, thanking him for always tipping them respect when he came in on nights I wasn't with him. Mine had a small card that said, "Welcome to the headache," signed by everyone on the roster, and a Polaroid of our table, taken from the hallway, the kind of photo that catches people mid-laugh and mid-chew and somehow makes them look less foolish than you'd expect. We left the restaurant at 9:30, the sky full dark and the lot a mix of shiny SUVs and the kind of sedans you keep an extra quart of oil in the trunk for. Dad hugged Chef in the way men hug men without making a scene. Aunt Nora told Ellie she could take a punch if anyone tried to move her next time. My mother stood just outside the pool of light from the doorway and looked at me with eyes that could have been soft if they weren't also ringed by what happens when you spend a lifetime choosing the safe story. "You did it," she said, and it wasn't a compliment. It wasn't not one either. "We'll speak tomorrow." "I'll bring coffee," I said, because offering something small can sometimes move the needle a fraction. She nodded once, got into the passenger seat without waiting for Dad to open the door because she opens her own doors when she needs to prove something, and watched him walk around the car like she was remembering 100 nights he had done the same thing. On the way home, the Braves had lost by 1 and the announcer sounded like a man whose dog had eaten his sandwich, and Dad said it didn't matter because the steak had won. The air through the windows smelled like cut grass and hot rubber, and we passed the church with the sign out front announcing Vacation Bible School in 2 weeks, the letters crooked in a way that only bothers my mother. I let the night sit on me like a weight I could shoulder for a while, and I fixed the clock in my head on the Saturday we were walking into. The one where you run into people at the farmer's market and at the garage sale on First Street and in the parking lot of the grocery store with the rotisserie chickens under the heat lamps. On the second Saturday of the month, I arrived at my parents' house at 10 with coffees and bagels because sugar and caffeine soften the edges of a morning after. The local news was playing a segment about a charity car wash at the high school, and Dad was already in his chair with the sports section folded open like a tent. Mom was at the table with a legal pad she uses when she wants to look authoritative. She had written a list that I couldn't see the top of, and her pen was uncapped, ready to continue. "We need to discuss boundaries," she said, not looking at the coffee, which she prefers lukewarm and sweet. "Financial boundaries. Professional boundaries. Family boundaries. You made decisions without considering everyone." "I considered everyone," I said, setting her coffee in front of her anyway. "I decided everyone didn't need to vote. The restaurant is mine to run with the people I signed with. The family is not the board. You don't get to call the host stand and demand changes because you prefer your room colder." "You embarrass me," she said, and the word landed like a plate set too hard on a table. "You made me look like a pushy woman who calls the police for attention." "I didn't call anyone," I said. "You did. A call was made. They came and discovered no problem. That result isn't my fault." Dad rustled the paper like a man who prefers not to referee unless the ball is clearly out of bounds. He folded the section, set it in his lap, and looked at both of us like we were players he could still coach. "Deb," he said, and his voice used her name softly, which diffuses more than a raised tone ever could. She invited us to dinner. It was good. People were kind. She did something big with her life. You don't have to clap, but you don't get to boo. My mother's mouth tightened and then loosened a little, as if a muscle had given up. "I am not booing," she said. "I am cautious." "Be cautious over coffee," Dad said. "She brought you one." Mom looked at me then, not at the legal pad, not at her list. "Who co-signed?" she said, and for the first time her voice had something in it that wasn't competition. It was the sound people make when they run the numbers in their head and realize there's a blank they can't fill. "Tell me there isn't a man who took advantage of you because you wanted to be seen." "The owner carried the note," I said. "No bank. No man whose name I can't live with. Seller financing, slow and steady, tied to performance. I know where every dollar is going. I know who gets paid and when. I know how many pounds of catfish we go through on a Friday and what happens when the shipment is late." She blinked like I had used a foreign measure. "I still don't like surprises." "I know," I said. "Next time I'll decide whether you're disliking something is a reason not to do it. Sometimes it will be. Sometimes it won't." She tapped the pen on the pad and then drew a line through something I couldn't read. "Fine," she said. "If you're going to be this, then we need to talk about the club. Your father and I like it. It isn't evil. It's where we know people. You don't get to cast it as the villain because you found a room with string lights." "I didn't," I said. "The club isn't the villain. The villain is what happens when you use reputation as a stick to hit your own kid with. The club's fine. Their bread's okay." Dad snorted and hid it behind the sports section. Mom looked at the coffee like it might be poison and took a sip. "I will not apologize for caring how we look," she said. "This town watches." "Then let them watch us eat a good meal without calling the police," I said, and my voice stayed even because I was tired and done playing with words like they were a puzzle. "Let them watch you allow your daughter to grow up in public. Let them watch my father enjoy his birthday. Let them mind their own dinners." She put the pen down. She sat back. "You always were stubborn," she said, and it came out as something close to a compliment, which is as rare in that kitchen as a snowstorm in May. I suppose that fits in a person who owns a piece of something. I don't like it, but I suppose. The phone rang then with a ringtone that belongs to the woman who runs the church bulletin, and Mom answered with the voice she saves for women she both envies and pities. She said yes, last night was fine, and yes, the club will see us another time, and yes, the restaurant was cleaner than expected, and then she laughed a laugh that didn't sound like a knife, and she hung up. She looked at me again, not smiling, but not. "Next time," she said, "don't let me be the last to know." "Next time," I said, "tell me you're proud instead of telling everyone else I can't afford bread." She made a soft noise that could have been a start. Dad cleared his throat. "Speaking of affording," he said, "those tires. Let me help." "You already have," I said. "You showed up and ate without checking the price. That's worth more than 4 tires." He looked at me like he wanted to argue, then like he didn't, and then like the game was back on, and he unfolded the paper with a relief that made me glad the world still prints things. By the 3rd Monday, the restaurant had settled into a rhythm that made my chest loosen at noon and tighten again around 5 in a way I found myself grateful for because it meant I cared. I took receipt of a delivery that had driven 6 miles in the wrong direction because the new guy didn't trust his GPS, and I nodded to the plumber who came to look at a drain that size like an old man when the dishwasher runs too long. And I answered an email from a woman asking if we could host a rehearsal dinner without making it look like Pinterest threw up, which is the kind of request that makes me love people even when they exhaust me. Around 3, Ellie told me there was a woman on the phone asking if we accepted anonymous donations for the staff Christmas party. I took the call, expecting someone who wants a plaque on a wall, and heard my mother clear her throat. "I don't want anyone knowing this is from me," she said. "That ruins the point." "Noted," I said. "But you know I'll know." "Don't make it weird," she said. "Just keep a list." "I trust you to do that right." "I will," I said, and I wrote anonymous on a line in a notebook because I've learned that keeping a ledger isn't just for money. On the last Thursday before payday, I drove Dad to the community center car show because he likes to look at other people's chrome and talk about engines like teenagers do. And we sat on folding chairs and drank lemonade from paper cups while the local news ran a segment about a heat advisory that was more about the anchor's tie than the weather. He nudged me with his elbow and said he was going to tell the guys that his daughter owns half of a stake, and I told him not to because people get weird around that word. And he laughed and said people get weird around all words if you use them with the wrong face. On the drive home, he said he didn't know how I had found the guts to sign the papers, and I told him I had practiced on smaller pens, and he said he understood, and then we drove past the club and he waved without sarcasm, which taught me more about being a grown person than any list I could have made. On Sunday after church, Mom didn't say anything in the parking lot about money or optics. She asked if the shrimp would still be good on Tuesdays, and she looked like she had memorized the specials board in her head so she could pretend she hadn't. I said yes. She said fine. The heat came up off the blacktop and made the air taste like rubber and sunshine, and the bell chimed the quarter hour, and someone from the choir walked by pretending not to hear anything that mattered. I slid my phone back into my bag because there was nothing left to record that wouldn't be a repeat. The next Friday, which was the 3rd of the month and the day the farmer's market sells out of peaches by 10 if you don't get there early, a woman stopped me by the pastry case while I was writing notes on the weekend schedule and asked if the owner was in. I told her the owner was in the office filling out a form that takes too long and uses words no one should use in the same paragraph, and she asked if she could speak to the manager about a group dinner in 2 weeks for her father who had worked at the plant with mine. I looked up and realized she was somebody's cousin and somebody else's sister, and that every story circles if you let it. I said yes. I said we could honor him in a room that didn't need to be called a club to be worthy. I said we'd do family-style salad and ribeye and a cake that tastes like someone's grandmother made it. She nodded like I had said a prayer she didn't know she wanted, and she wrote a date on a paper napkin because people still do that when it matters. The calendar in my mind moved forward to the last Saturday of the month, the one with the charity car wash and the neighbor's garage sale and the PTA email that never comes on time. The story was not over. My mother would find new ways to push, and I would find new ways to hold, and somewhere in there, Dad would watch a game on TV with the sound low and a plate balanced on his knees, and a room with windows would fill up with people who clap with forks in their hands. The revenge I had wanted without saying it out loud had not exploded. It had unfolded. It had not burned a bridge. It had built a table that my mother could either sit at or stare at from the doorway, and every day, she would be invited to choose. The 3rd Thursday of the month baked the sidewalks until the tar lines shone, and the local news kept looping a story about a heat index warning while a weatherman in a loud tie drew circles around the same storm cell that would probably pass us by like it always does until the one time it doesn't. I was at the host stand at 5:15 checking the night's notes when my mother walked in wearing the expression she brings to funerals and award banquets. The one that says she will allow an event to happen while reserving the right to declare later that everyone did it wrong. "Your father wants coffee," she said, as if a man who has carried his own thermos since the 80s needed an advocate. "We're going to sit at the two-top near the windows, and we will not be photographed for your social media." She said social media the way people used to say disco. Dad followed, blue shirt again, the Braves cap in his hand even though he never wears hats inside. He held it like a passport that could get him through a checkpoint. "We're not here to fight," he said under his breath as I grabbed menus out of habit. "We're here to drink coffee and see if the shrimp tastes as good without a birthday around it." I led them toward the windows where the street throws in its reflection like a free extra. And I laid down napkins and water and let their silence sit for a moment, because sometimes the only thing that works is not filling the air with explanations until people have finished hearing the last one you gave them. "I canceled the club's May-up dessert," Mom said without looking up from the napkin she had aligned with the table edge. The woman at the desk was gracious. She said she understood that families sometimes prefer other arrangements. She also said you had sent a thank you note, which was not necessary. She lifted her eyes, and somewhere in there I saw a small adjustment, like a person realizing a picture hangs straight even when they were certain it tilted. "I do not like being the last to know," she added, which was not new. "But I am not going to spend Father's Day weekend arguing with a hostess." "You just did," Dad said, and the corners of his mouth moved enough to show me he wasn't bleeding. "Let the girl bring the coffee." Ellie set down mugs and cream like a person lowering something fragile into water, and I told them I had an hour before I needed to be chained to the book in the office for reservations. And Mom said she would only need 10 minutes because anything longer, and she would think it was a trap. The conversation that followed wasn't a neat knot. It was all loose ends and slow pulls. She wanted to know what operating stake meant in plain English, and I told her it meant I could make decisions that fixed small problems before they became large invoices, and that I had a ladder in the back I wasn't afraid to climb when a light bulb burned out rather than waiting 3 days for a maintenance man who would likely show up an hour after our doors opened and need to stand on a chair in the middle of dinner. She asked about payroll and whether Lex was paid enough because she liked the way the young woman kept the room steady without showing her hand. And Dad asked if the Braves game would be on the small set above the bar on silent because he didn't want to look like a guy who needs everything tuned to his station. They sipped coffee, and we let the quiet press against us without making anyone burst. By the second Friday after Dad's dinner, the storm the weatherman had been tracing finally arrived without drama until it was on top of us. At 6:05 the sky went from yellow to gray in a way that made the air hum, and by 6:10 the first rumble rolled through like a bowling ball down the long lane of the street. Lex moved candles to the pass in case we needed them, which is a thing the health department would prefer we not do and a thing we do anyway without telling on ourselves, and Chef said he hoped the power had the decency to wait until after the ribeye reached temperature. At 6:20 the lights blinked, and a chorus rose from the dining room that wasn't fear, it was more like acknowledgement. And at 6:21 the whole room went dim except for the exit signs and the little rectangle over the pass that glowed on the emergency circuit like a stubborn nightlight. We're set up on gas, and the hood has a battery for a few minutes, so we weren't in danger. We were just about to have a night that told everyone who we were without a Facebook post having to say it. Ellie's eyes found mine, and I nodded, and she did the thing good hosts do. She moved toward the nearest table to set the tone. "We're still cooking," she said, voice low, smile that didn't pretend. "We're switching to a greatest hits menu until the lights come back. We'll comp dessert if you stay. We'll pack it up if you can't." My parents had wandered in 5 minutes before the thunder because Dad has a way of showing up at the exact moment a story clears its throat. He took one look at the room and laughed under his breath. "Here's where we see if the club would have done better," he said, and Mom cut him a look that slid off because he didn't mean it with teeth. People pulled out their phones and used them as lanterns for menus they didn't need. Chef stepped out from behind the pass and spoke to the first foretop with a clarity that made the room tilt toward him. "We've got catfish, ribeye, shrimp, and grits," he said. "No salads because we're not chopping in the dark, and I'm not asking my line to julienne by candle. The grill's hot, the pans are hotter, and the coffee's as good as a French press with a prayer can make it. The room exhaled, and the laughter that followed wasn't nervous. It was the kind of town offers itself when the lights go out and the weather chooses to remind you live here. Lex moved like water, redirecting servers into a simple dance that kept plates moving, and I went to the office to grab the paper checks we keep for the handful of times electricity decides to leave us alone on a Friday. Mom watched me with an expression I had not seen since I was 12 and fixed the loose cabinet handle by finding the correct screwdriver instead of waiting for Dad to get home from work. I set candles on the far side of the paths where no one would mistake them for decoration and told Chef I'd float between the long room and the front, and he said he would call out every plate as if we were playing Sandlot and needed to tell the kids which base to cover. Dad angled himself into the corner where the bar TV's emergency circuit kept the score crawl alive in red and white letters, and he grinned like someone who believes the world does small favors for people who show up without complaining. Polite chaos settled into a rhythm that felt like a familiar song played on an old radio. Ellie handled walk-ins with a calm apology and a promise they could come back tomorrow for free cornbread, and the cornbread only costs us 50 cents a head and buys goodwill that you cannot put on a balance sheet without using the wrong math. At 6:45 the door opened and a gust brought in 5 women from my mother's Sunday group, each holding a purse against the rain like a shield, and each with the look that says they know the club has a generator and takes care of its own. They were escorted by the woman from the club desk who wears a perfume that can arrive 10 seconds before she does. "We thought we would check on you," the woman said sweetly, which sounds like charity and often isn't. "We have lights, if your guests wish to be relocated. We can match any price point to ease the transition." She looked at my mother for backup, then at me, then at the dim room where half the town had decided to keep sitting. My mother held her purse like she might throw it at me, then like maybe she wouldn't. She looked around and saw our people, the plant guys at the foretop telling the server they'd eat whatever came out first, the couple celebrating a 10th anniversary by holding hands across a water glass because the candlelight did their faces a favor, the busser moving with a flashlight tucked into his waistband like a pro. She took a breath, not a dramatic one, just the kind you take when you're going to choose in public. "We're fine," she said to the club woman, whose smile paused and then refit itself as politeness. "We're staying." She said it not to me, not to the room, but to herself, and then Saturday, "Do you have those shrimp?" she asked Ellie in that tone that almost passed for ordinary. "My husband liked them," she added, a concession and a reminder and a small truce in a single sentence. The rain let up around 7:10, and the lights fluttered twice before coming back with a jolt that drew a cheer from the corner by the kitchen. The dishwasher hummed back like an old man clearing his throat, and the little TV over the bar returned to life with the sound still off. By 7:30, we had served more ribeye in the dark than we usually do with full light and a prep list, and there wasn't a plate that came back with a complaint. There were plates that came back wiped clean. I stood at the edge of the long room and watched my parents eat their quiet dinner in the low light and thought about how some decisions don't land with a bang, but with the weight of a fork set on a plate after the last bite. Dad waved me over and pointed to the coffee mug in a way that asked without making me fetch it myself like I'm still the kid he sends to the kitchen. I topped it off and poured one for Mom without asking her, and she didn't correct me. "Your staff," she said, and I waited because sometimes the second half of a sentence matters more than the first. They didn't panic. They didn't look to you for permission before they did the right thing. That speaks well of you, even if I'm not ready to clap like a seal. She sipped the coffee, which had gone from French press with a prayer to honest drip when the power returned. "We ran the church kitchen during homecoming without a stove once," she added, not looking at me. "We fed 50 on cold ham and store bread and no one died. People still bring it up like it was heroism when it was just stubbornness and a clean counter." She set the mug down carefully and lifted her gaze. I see you're stubborn. I concede that it has uses. My throat tightened in the way that makes your voice go thin, so I didn't answer. Just put my hand on the back of Dad's chair and let my fingers rest there until my body remembered how to be in a room without needing to prove it belonged. He reached back and squeezed my knuckles once, the kind of small gesture men from here allow themselves when all the big gestures have been taken by work and weather. The climax arrived in a form I didn't choose, which is how climaxes usually arrive if you're honest, not as a confrontation I'd scripted for the sake of a moral, but as a phone call I didn't want to take. The following Tuesday after PTA night, around 9:30, Lex slid the cordless into my hand with the look she uses for calls she would prefer to intercept. The voice on the other end identified itself as a representative from the health department, which can make your stomach fold even if you keep a kitchen as clean as a hospital playbook. He said they had received an anonymous complaint about improper food handling during a power outage and that they would be stopping by Thursday afternoon to review procedures. The word anonymous did the thing it always does in small towns, which is to wrap itself around a handful of possible names and wait for you to say one. I thanked him, wrote the time down, and told Chef, who said he would be here with his logs and his ladder and a shirt that didn't have a stain on it, which is how he announces he won't be pushed over by a clipboard. Thursday came with weather that might as well have been printed in a booklet titled August Preview, and the inspector arrived with a clipboard and a tone that wasn't unkind, just professional enough to make everyone speak 2 decibels lower. We walked the line and the walk-in and the hand-wash station and the temp logs from Friday, he asked when we had pulled the shellfish. And Chef showed him the time and the notation and the part where the staff switched from mixed greens to catfish and ribeye because you don't julienne in a storm. He asked about open flame, and Lex showed him where the candles had been set beyond reach in the pass, and he nodded at our copper fire extinguishers like a man who knows they are heavy and useful. We passed. We didn't ace it like a valedictorian. We passed like a team that practiced because they care. As he signed the form, he gave a small shrug that might have been an apology. We get calls, he said. We check because we should. This looked like everyone doing what they were supposed to do. I'll see you in 6 months for the boring routine. I stepped outside to breathe the smell of hot asphalt and the soft sweetness from the bakery 2 doors down, and my phone buzzed with a text from Mom that said, "Are you busy today at 4?" which meant she was sitting in the parking lot counting the cars. I told her I had a break at 4:15, and when she came in she didn't do the entrance she likes. She just slid onto a bar stool and ordered an iced tea and waited until the inspector's taillights were no longer visible through the front windows. You passed, she said, not a question. Someone called because some people like to watch other people flinch. She didn't add that she had been one of those people on a different day, and I didn't make her. I brought you something for your anonymous line, she said, sliding an envelope across the bar. It is not for a plaque. It is not for your social media. It is for your staff holiday fund. If you decide to accept it, I will accept that you have made a choice about what kind of person you are. If you choose to refuse it because you think I'm buying redemption, I will accept that too. She took a sip of tea and made a face because we don't sweeten by default, and she pretends to forget that every time. For the record, she added, I called no one this week except your father and the woman at the club who still thinks I hate this place. I told her to try the catfish. I'll put it on the line under anonymous, I said, and neither of us said that the line isn't a place, it's a decision, and that some ledgers live in your head and keep you honest when no clipboard can prove it. We had an inspection because that's what happens when people run rooms, I added. We passed because Chef washes his hands like a surgeon and Ellie treats the pass like her grandmother's sink. That's our redemption. Not your envelope. She nodded once. I am proud, she said, in the same tone she has used for I disagree all my life, which meant she had to pick new words, and they tasted unfamiliar. Please do not make me say it again today. My throat is dry. We had the last family test on the final Sunday of the month, the one where the church bulletin lists vacation Bible school volunteers and people check for their names like kids look for their pictures on the team poster. After service, nobody said the word embarrassment to me in the parking lot, which I took as progress. Mom didn't bring up the club. She did bring up the shrimp and whether we could freeze them for winter, which I told her we could not if we wanted to sleep at night. Dad asked if the TV above the bar would have captions for the late game, and I told him yes, because Ellie had already set them to default, and he looked satisfied with a world that could be arranged by a simple menu setting. We met at 5 for a quiet supper in the long room without the lights dimmed and without a cake, just the steady sound of forks and the low hum of people who think Sunday night is for being gentle to your stomach. My sister brought a new boyfriend who loaded the dishwasher after he ate and said he didn't need to be told where the soap was, which earned him more goodwill than he knew. Aunt Nora produced a Tupperware of her coleslaw that Chef pretended not to approve of and then asked for seconds. Halfway through coffee, Dad put his cup down and cleared his throat and said he had a speech, which is not a thing he does often, and therefore made the table lift its chin. The first Friday of the month, he said, eyes on the table rather than our faces, I ate a steak that tasted like something a person who loved me put on a plate. I don't care how it got there. I care that it did. He looked at Mom then, not for permission, not for the last word, just to make sure she was listening. I am going to eat here on Thursdays when I can. I am going to order shrimp if they have it and catfish if they don't. If anybody in this family wants to go to the club, they can. If anybody wants to sit in this room and put their elbows on the table, they can. The only rule is nobody calls anybody else about it after the fact to tell them what they should have done. I don't have room in my week for that anymore. Mom stared into her cup in the way people do when the liquid inside seems to be offering advice. She nodded once and then again, as if her neck needed a rehearsal before performing in public. Fine, she said. We will be a two-restaurant family. She gave me a look that could have been scolding in a different month and landed as something like acceptance. Do not make me join your Facebook, she said. Text me the menu. We walked out into the warm dark, the cricket noise thick enough to feel like a radio someone forgot to turn off. The street smelled like cut grass and the faint sweetness of the bakery's end-of-day sugar, and the little TV over the bar sent a white crawl of scores into the night even through the glass, because that set refuses to mind lighting rules. Dad hugged me with that single, sturdy squeeze, then clasped Chef's hand like a teammate's because they had earned it, and Mom touched the host's stand with her fingertips on the way out like she was acknowledging a threshold she hadn't known she'd crossed. I will never like surprises, she said as if there were a courtroom taking notes. But I will try to like this one on purpose. I locked the long room and turned off the overheads and left the little light over the pass on because a restaurant looks wrong in total darkness, like a stage after a show without a custodian humming to himself. In the office, I wrote Anonymous Staff Fund on a line that would be invisible to anyone who hadn't earned the right to read it, and I put the envelope in the safe because some things deserve steel even if they come from a person who would prefer flowers. Ellie finished stacking the menus and asked if I was sleeping any better, and I said sometimes, and she said that counts. Chef opened the back door to let the night in, and the zipper sound of cicadas washed into the kitchen like static, and the tiny blue light on the dishwasher blinked a steady rhythm that said it would be ready again for Monday's prep. My revenge was never the cake or the ribeye or even the envelope stamped with a bank name and a balance that proved I wasn't bluffing. It was the table that stayed put when someone tried to move it with phone calls and implications. It was the candle set where it belonged and the staff that carried plates through a dim room without tripping. It was a mother who walked in with a plan to relocate dinner and walked out with a standing order for iced tea and a request to text her the shrimp specials. It cost time and sleep and a visit from an inspector who had to check a box because people with clipboards always do. It paid out in a father who said he would eat what I cooked without asking for a price first, and a town that decided, at least for one night, to clap when the lights came back on. A month is not a long time to reroute a family story that has run a certain way for decades, but it was enough to set down a new line and say the words out loud that we would need to hear when the next storm rolled through and the room cooled and the power flickered. The staff greeted me as the owner again that night, not with a chorus, not with a bow, just with a nod when I walked through the kitchen and a plate handed to me with the same care they show a guest. I stood in the doorway and watched my mother drink her tea without making a face, and I let the simple fact of it do all the talking I used to rush to do myself.